believe in change, to invest in potential. And while there's nobility in that, there's also danger, especially when you're dealing with someone who's already shown you who they are, not told you, shown you with their choices, with their patterns, with their indifference. But we ignore it. We overwrite the truth with fantasy. We hold on to the glimmers of goodness, magnify them, and hope they'll bloom into something more. That's the beginning of attachment, and the longer you ignore what they've already revealed, the deeper you fall into a bond that was never built on truth to begin with. Accepting what someone shows you the first time requires discipline. It demands that you look pain in the face and say, "'Tis is enough for me to walk away." But most people don't. Most people wait for confirmation through suffering. They wait for betrayal to repeat. They wait until the disappointment is undeniable, and by then they're so entangled emotionally that detachment feels like losing a part of themselves. That's what makes it hard to leave. Not the love, but the identity you created around that person, the story you told yourself about who they could be. We don't fall in love with reality. We fall in love with projections. We fall in love with the version of them that exists in our imagination, not in our lived experience. That's why it hurts so deeply when things end. Because we're not just grieving the person, we're grieving the story, the future we designed in our minds. And when you've invested emotionally in a fantasy, the truth feels ruled and one, accept the reality, not the fantasy like betrayal. Even if it was always there in plain sight, you saw the red flags, you felt the gut, no instinct, that quiet discomfort during conversations, that slight hesitation before trusting them fully. You knew, but knowing isn't the same as accepting. Knowing is awareness. Accepting is action, and detachment begins the moment you stop trying to edit what's real, the moment you take off the rose-colored glasses and see them, not for what you wish they were, but for what they consistently are. You've got to understand people tell you everything you need to know and how they show up, and if they're inconsistent, neglectful, disrespectful, that's not a phase, that's not stress, they're just going through something, that's their baseline, that's what you're going to get long-term, and waiting for it to change is like watering a dead plant. It doesn't matter how much you give, the outcome stays the same. There's a harsh truth here that a lot of people don't want to hear. If someone mistreats you, it's not your job to make them better. It's not your duty to become lovable enough to awaken something in them. You are not a rehab center for emotionally unavailable people. You're not here to earn respect that should be given freely. If someone can't value you without being begged, without being reminded, then they don't value you, and you're not the exception that's going to change them. They are who they are, and they've shown you that. Is the moment you detach, not out of hate, not out of bitterness, but because your peace, your clarity, your future depends on your ability to see things as they are. You can't keep arguing with reality and expect to be free. You have to surrender the fantasy. You have to mourn what could have been. You have to let go of the idea that love means holding on no matter what. Sometimes love means leaving. Sometimes love is knowing when something isn't healthy and walking away with your dignity intact. People aren't puzzles to solve, and your worth isn't defined by how much you can endure. There is no prize at the end of suffering, just exhaustion, and you deserve more than to be tired all the time, emotionally drained, spiritually empty because you stayed in something that asked you to ignore your own needs. That's not love, that's self-abandonment. It's time to accept, time to believe them the first time to stop waiting for a different version of someone who already showed you what they're capable of. That's how detachment begins. Not in a moment of anger, but in a moment of clarity, in the stillness of knowing this is, and that quiet truth is more powerful than any excuse they could ever give. It's an agonizing realization to come to that. Your silence, your absence might start to echo louder in her mind than your words ever did. That's the strange paradox of human relationships. We assume that staying quiet keeps the peace, that withholding your voice, your presence somehow shields you from pain. But in truth, it does the opposite. Silence speaks, and in the right context, it screams. You have to understand what happens when you stop showing up, when you stop explaining, stop justifying, stop chasing closure. It shifts the dynamic entirely, especially with someone who believed deep down that you'd never walk away. People who are used to being chased don't know what to do when the footsteps behind them disappear. They pause. And for the first time, they're forced to look over their shoulder and face the space they created. That silence becomes the mirror they've spent years avoiding. And it's not the silence itself that breaks her. It's what fills the silence, her own thoughts. The ones she's tried to ignore, the ones she drowned out with attention, distractions, validation. But now they rise in your absence. The questions begin the internal dialogue she never wanted to have. Why did he stop caring? Why didn't he try harder? Was I wrong? And here's the thing. Those questions have nothing to do with you anymore. They're hers to wrestle with, hers to confront, because when you finally go quiet, you rule and to create emotional boundaries. Give her the opportunity to hear herself for the first time, and what she hears, it stings people who are addicted to control, who manipulate affection, who play power games in relationships. They're not prepared for silence because silence removes the battlefield. There's nothing to fight, no reaction to provoke, no attention to exploit. It leaves them with the only opponent they can, outsmart themselves. And that is when the ego starts to fracture, when the performance begins to crumble. She might try to act indifferent. She might try to pretend your absence doesn't affect her. But that's just armor, a delay, a final attempt to maintain the illusion of control. But internally she knows. She knows the weight of what was lost. She feels the dissonance of your silence like a thread unraveling everything she built up around herself. And the longer you stay silent, the more that thread pulls apart the facade. Because here's the truth. There's nothing more powerful than a man who no longer needs to explain himself. A man who walks away not out of anger, but out of clarity. That kind of silence isn't weakness. It's strength. It's restraint. It's wisdom. And it lingers. It stays in her mind in ways that words never could. Because now you're not a presence. She can manage. You're a void. She can't control. You don't need to retaliate, to make a statement. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to prove you are worthy. All you need to do is walk away in peace and let time do what time does best. It reveals who truly valued the connection, who took it for granted, who expected you to stay forever, despite giving you reasons to leave. And when time passes and the silence remains, it creates a pressure that no ego can withstand forever. Eventually she will realize, not all at once, slowly, in the quiet hours, in the moments when no one else is around to validate her, in the stillness where your absence used to be comfort or conflict. That's when the regret starts to form. That's when the weight of her decisions begins to press down, and no amount of pride, no amount of external validation can drown out the truth that starts to surface. You're not being cruel by staying silent, you're being clear. You're letting go of a dynamic that was never balanced, never fair, never fully seen. And in doing so, you're reclaiming something far more important than her attention. You're reclaiming your self-respect. That is the message your silence carries. Not "I hate you," not "I hope you suffer," but "I finally choose me." And that is what breaks her ego. Not your anger, not your pain, but your peace. Because peace is the one thing she never thought you'd find without her. The one thing she believed she could withhold, manipulate, or control. And now, here you are, still calm, unmoved, and her world for the first time begins to shake, because now the only voice left is her own. And that silence, that's what lingers. Not every battle is fought with words. Some of the loudest victories are won in absolute quiet. There's something remarkably unsettling that happens when someone realizes you're no longer available in the way they took for granted. You see, attention is addictive, especially yours. And when that attention is suddenly gone, when your energy is withdrawn without explanation, it creates a vacuum, and in that vacuum, the very person who once dismissed your presence begins to chase the echo of it. It's not you they necessarily want back. It's not even the relationship they truly miss. It's the feeling of being desired, the feeling of being the center of someone else's emotional orbit. And when that disappears, the panic sets in. People don't crumble immediately. No, it's gradual. It's the slow burn of a realization creeping in like a shadow. At first, she'll pretend she doesn't care. She'll distract herself, maybe even throw herself into the attention of others to prove, mostly to herself, that you were never that important. But that act doesn't last because deep down she knows the truth. It was your presence. Rule 3. Replace attachment with purpose that gave her that sense of importance in the first place. It was your consistency, your willingness to be there, your refusal to abandon her even when she pushed you away, that fed her validation. And now that you're silent, now that you're gone, the mirror is cracked and the illusion starts to fall apart in the beginning. She might find comfort in her ego in the belief that you'll come back, that your silence is temporary, that you're just playing a game, but with each passing day, that comfort erodes because you're not chasing, you're not correcting her perception. You are not trying to fix what broke, and it's that stillness, that complete lack of pursuit that begins to speak the loudest. It's not your words she remembers, it's your energy, your emotional investment, your willingness to show up when things were hard, and that memory becomes haunting, especially in the contrast of your silence now. Because what it reveals isn't your weakness, but your restraint, your decision to stop pouring yourself into a container that had holes. That level of clarity, that kind of withdrawal is rare, and it leaves a mark. You see, when she was with you, she was never alone, not truly even in conflict, even in distance. There was this unspoken safety net. She knew you'd be there. She knew you'd come back. But now that net is gone, and the fall begins not physically, not publicly, but emotionally, internally. And that's where real breakdowns happen, when no one else is around to witness them. It's not that you wished for her to fall apart. This isn't about revenge. It's about reality. Actions have consequences. And when you spent enough time being overlooked, undervalued, maybe even disrespected, choosing to walk away is the only dignified thing left to do. That choice doesn't make you cruel. It makes you conscious of your worth, conscious of the difference between love and obligation, conscious of the fact that you can't keep giving to someone who doesn't even realize what they're receiving. And here's the strange twist. The more peace you carry in your silence, the more it unsettles her, because she expected anger, she expected confrontation, she expected you to demand closure, but instead you gave none of it, and that void forces her to face the mirror without your voice there to soften the reflection. That's when it begins to eat at her. That's when the guilt starts to take shape, not because you guilted her, but because she realizes she did it all herself there. It's nothing quite like watching someone finally understand the cost of losing something they thought they could always come back to, not because you wanted them to suffer, but because they needed to wake up. And sometimes the only thing that wakes people up is absence, not punishment, not pain, just the complete removal of presence. That's where the lessons begin. That's when the reflection becomes unavoidable. You didn't break her. You just stopped fixing her illusions. You stopped carrying the weight of her indecision. And when you did that, you gave her the opportunity to truly feel the absence, not just of your body, but of your energy, your effort, your care. And that kind of absence is heavy. It doesn't go away quickly. It lingers in the places where your laughter used to live, in the texts that don't come, in the moments of silence that stretch on longer than expected. That's what breaks the ego. That's what cracks the mask. Let her sit in it. Not because you're heartless, but because that's where transformation lives, not in comfort, not in validation, but in the raw confrontation with consequences. That's how people grow. That's how they finally understand what they once took for granted. And if she ever does come to that understanding, it will be without your voice, guiding her to it. And that silence will echo longer than anything you ever said. There's a strange power in not reacting. Most people are addicted to validation, to getting a response, even if it's angry or hurt. When you stay silent, when you withdraw your energy and attention entirely, it becomes something unexpected. It forces the other person to confront not just what they did, but who they are without you in the picture. That confrontation, that collision between their ego and the reality of your absence is brutal, and yet it's honest rule for stop replaying the past. There's no manipulation and silence. It's pure consequence when someone breaks your heart, and you choose not to retaliate with rage or emotional pleading. You do something. Most people aren't ready for you. Expose their emptiness, because when someone expects you to beg, to plead, to chase, and you do none of it, you're not just removing yourself from the equation, you're removing their power. And that shift is devastating to someone who relied on your reaction to feel significant, especially if her ego was built on the belief that you'd always be there. that no matter what she did, no matter how she pushed or pulled, you'd respond, you'd come back, you'd be emotionally available. The silent withdrawal shatters that illusion, that silence. It's not just quiet, it speaks volumes. It says, I've seen what you're capable of, and I've decided it's no longer worth my peace. It's a language of clarity, a statement of self-respect, because real strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. The strongest people are the ones who can walk away without needing to prove a point. They don't leave fire in their wake, they just leave, and the absence burns far more deeply than words ever could. You're not punishing her when you go silent. That's not the point. What you're doing is choosing not to participate in the narrative. She's been writing a narrative where you're always reactive, always available, always one emotional pull away from returning. But now she's alone with the last thing she ever expected, your indifference. And nothing forces a person to question themselves more than realizing that someone they once controlled emotionally is no longer playing the game. It's easy for someone to play with your emotions when they know you'll respond, that you'll try to fix things, that you'll bend just a little more to make it work. But when you stop bending, when your silence becomes the answer, that's when the real unraveling begins, because now there's no one left to blame, no target for their frustration, just a mirror, and the reflection in that mirror can be unbearable. You're not abandoning her. Let's be clear about that. You're removing yourself from a dynamic that was built on imbalance. You gave, she took. You tried, she tested. And after enough cycles of that, the silence becomes necessary. Not to hurt her, but to finally hear yourself again, to listen to that quiet voice inside that's been whispering, and do you deserve better? That voice doesn't shout. It just waits patiently until the noise stops, and you finally realize what peace really feels like. And in that peace, you'll start to understand the cost of constantly chasing approval. You'll see how much of your energy was spent trying to prove your worth to someone who couldn't even see it. And that realization, though painful, is liberating, because once you've tasted that kind of freedom, you can never go back. You won't want to, not even if she comes back apologizing, realizing, crying, because now you know what it feels like to exist outside of her approval, and you won't trade that for anything. Her ego may crack. She may even try to reconstruct it with new people, with distractions, with stories that paint her as the victim, but deep down she'll remember the one who didn't react, to one who didn't fight to be understood, the one who chose silence over chaos. And that memory will linger, not because you caused her pain, but because you didn't respond to it. That's what they'll never forget. There is immense strength and restraint in walking away without a scene and choosing yourself without making it her fault. That's not weakness, that's clarity. That's knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all, and in the end it's your silence, not your words, that echoes the longest. You have to understand something fundamental when you begin to pull yourself together after heartbreak. You become dangerous to the person who once took you for granted. It's not because you're trying to hurt them. It's not about revenge. It's about the shift in power, the transformation in your presence, because for the first time, perhaps ever, you're no longer defined by what they did to you. You're no longer orbiting their validation. And when that happens, when the light that once pointed toward them turns inward, it unsettles them in ways they never saw coming. See, there's a kind of ego that feeds on knowing you're broken without them, that thrives on the idea that you're stuck, spiraling, lost in the aftermath of their exit. That ego imagines itself as the sun, and you just one of the many things revolving around it. But the moment you stop spinning, when you realign your life and your energy, you're no longer predictable. You become something they can't control. And people who rely on control don't cope well with uncertainty. It pokes holes in their self-pity. Picture when she sees you rising. There's a moment of confusion because you weren't supposed to recover. Not like this, not with that much focus, that much calm, that much strength. She might not say it out loud, but it's there in the way she checks your page, in the way her mutual friends mention you. Rule of 5, rebuild self-worth and focus forward in. The way she subtly reappears in conversations, because your healing isn't just personal, it's disruptive, it challenges. The story she told herself about you, that you'd always need her more than she ever needed you. And when that story begins to fall apart, so does the pedestal she put herself on, because now she's faced with a truth that stings. She wasn't the end of your story, she was just a chapter. maybe a painful one, maybe one that nearly broke you, but not the final page, not the author. And when that realization sinks in, doesn't matter how high her ego stood, it begins to fracture, not because you intended it, but because the foundation it stood on, your dependence, no longer exists. Rising isn't about flexing. It's not about flaunting a new lifestyle or proving a point. It's much quieter than that. It's in the discipline, in the way you show up every day, even when it's hard, in how you start speaking with more clarity, walking with more purpose, surrounding yourself with people who challenge you, not drain you. It's in the silence of your focus. And trust me, nothing haunts someone with a fragile ego more than the quiet success of the one they underestimate, because you have to remember, ego doesn't deal well with reflection. It prefers distortion. It likes the version of you that was lost, desperate, pleading, but the new you, the one who doesn't look back, who doesn't chase, who isn't trying to be seen, that version exposes everything they never fixed in themselves. And that's what makes it so painful, because now she has to reckon with the fact that the person she thought was beneath her has grown beyond her reach. There's something incredibly powerful about becoming unavailable, not in a petty way, but in a purposeful one. When you're focused on your own development, your goals, your inner peace, you become scarce to the things that once tempted you to self-destruct. That scarcity, it creates weight. Your presence becomes rare, and anything rare becomes valuable, especially to someone who thought you'd always be easy to access. But here's the truth. She didn't lose you when she broke your heart. She lost you when she assumed you wouldn't recover. That was her mistake, her miscalculation. She thought her absence would define you. Instead, it refined you. And now every step you take forward, every win, every boundary, every moment of peace is a reminder that she was never the end of your story, only the start of your becoming. So rise not to prove her wrong, but to prove yourself right, to show yourself what happens when you don't give up, when you take all that pain and turn it into discipline, into clarity, into direction. And in doing that, you'll find something far more lasting than revenge or validation. You'll find freedom. And nothing breaks an ego like the silence of your success. You have to understand that your silence isn't just a lack of communication. It's a presence that lingers, echoes, and grows louder with each passing day there. Something paradoxical about silence. People often assume it means nothing, when in truth it means everything, because when words are gone, when explanations are withheld, what's left is the mind. And the mind is never truly still. It begins to wander. It begins to imagine. It begins to question. And eventually it begins to break down the very defenses a person built to shield themselves from consequence. When you stop chasing someone, especially someone who once relied on your constant attention, validation, or forgiveness, something peculiar begins to happen, and the power dynamic begins to invert. And where she once found security in your predictability, in knowing you'd always reach out, always fix things, always fold first, now there's only uncertainty, and that uncertainty breeds anxiety. A silent man forces others to listen to what they never heard before, their own cons, their own regret, their own ego. And often that's where the real unraveling begins. You see, if you had exploded in anger or begged for closure, she could have told herself a story that justified everything. He was weak, or he was emotional, or he couldn't handle it. It would have been easy, convenient, but you didn't give her that. You gave her space, and not the kind she asked for, but the kind she never thought she'd get, the kind that's cold, detached, absolute. And when someone with a fragile ego is given that kind of space, they begin to panic, not because they miss you in the romantic sense, but because they realize they're no longer the center of your world. And that's terrifying for someone who is feeding off that attention over time. Your silence becomes a mirror, not for you, but for her. It forces her to look inward. And the more she looks, the more cracks begin to form, because the narrative she built to protect herself doesn't hold up under reflection. She starts to remember the way she spoke to you, the way she dismissed you, the way she minimized your pain. And now that there's no more reassurance coming from your side, she starts to question everything. Did I misjudge him? Was I wrong? What if he never comes back? Those thoughts might not be voiced, but they echo in the quiet, and the ego, as inflated as it might be, starts to deflate under the weight of those questions. What most people don't understand is that distance isn't just physical. its final thoughts. Freedom starts within, energetic, emotional. And when that emotional distance becomes real, it hurts more than any argument could, because arguments mean you still care. Silence, that means you've let go. And when you've let go, you rob the other person of control. And that's when they start to spiral. She might act unbothered. She might post pictures, surround herself with distractions, pretend like she's thriving, but it's all noise because none of it fills the vacuum he left behind. Your silence carved out a space that nothing else seems to occupy, and every attempt she makes to fill it, whether through validation from others, new relationships, or social facades, only amplifies the hollowness because none of it carries the weight of your presence. And when someone starts to feel that absence in their bones, it's not just the heart that hurts, it's the ego that crumbles. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing someone has moved on without you, especially if you never imagined they could. And when you carry yourself with quiet strength, when you build your life without broadcasting it, when you find peace without seeking pity, that's when she starts to feel it. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in small, subtle moments, when she hears your name in conversation, when a memory slips through unexpectedly, when she wonders if you think of her at all. That's when it hits her. Not that you're gone, but that she can't reach you anymore. Not emotionally, not mentally. And that's what breaks her ego in the end. Not your anger, not your sadness, but your indifference. Your absence speaks louder than any words you could have said. It says, I've outgrown this. And when a man outgrows what once wounded him, he becomes untouchable. That is the beginning of true freedom, and true freedom is the end of control. Or stay silent, not out of spite, but out of strength, because the echo of your silence will do more to humble her ego than any speech ever.